And welcome into an updated look at the college football playoff rankings with 1 week left to go. Only conference championships. There's a lot to update. There's a lot of different scenarios. You've got Ohio State here potentially falling to an 8 seed. If that were to happen, they would be hosting a playoff game after the bad loss to Michigan. Michigan, congratulations to them. I think Gus Johnson said it best. Michigan won, and they didn't cheat this time. You've also got SMU earning a first round bye. SMU, if they finish 12-1, yes, they're going to be the number 3 overall seed. There's no doubt about it. 12-1 Power 4 conference champ, even though the schedule hasn't been that good. The ACC's bad. If they finish 12-1, this is what happens with the ACC. It's going to be very interesting. If Clemson beats SMU, the ACC, I think, is going to get 2 teams in, and that's a big problem for the SEC 3-loss teams. The SEC 3-loss teams being Alabama, South Carolina, and Ole Miss. It's going to be an issue because then SMU would be 11-2. They would not win the ACC, but they would have lost the conference championship game. Would you really punish them for that and keep them lower than the 3-loss SEC teams? I think they could potentially put SMU in the playoff. Although we will take a look at all the analytics and how that works out, because that really becomes a comparison of resumes. When you're talking about an SMU team, let's say they do finish at 11-2 with a close loss to Clemson. Clemson has to be in because they win their conference. Obviously, if SMU beats Clemson, the ACC is only going to get 1 team in. Miami is done. They're out because you're 10-2. You have no ranked wins. You lose to Syracuse. You don't even make a bad conference championship because the ACC is not very good this year. They're done. So for the ACC, if you are an SEC fan of one of the 3-loss teams like in Alabama, you want SMU to win because then Clemson's done and there's only 1 ACC team. When you look at the Big Ten, I think it's very, let's just go through this and then I'll talk about all the conferences. But you can see they're talking about Ohio State with a shocking loss. We all expected Ohio State to face Oregon. Ohio State was sitting 3.5-point favorites against Oregon in the look-ahead line. And now it looks like Oregon's around 3-point favorites over Penn State. It's going to be Oregon against Penn State. So you also have that dynamic to look at. And then it looks like they're just talking about Ohio State losing to a really not good Michigan team that could not pass the ball at all. This college football playoff prediction is based on a win by Georgia over Texas in the SEC title game, which would give Georgia the number 2 seed. The Longhorns will not be hurt too badly. Yeah, that would be interesting. You could say Texas is probably the 5 seed. I mean, I still don't think Texas has that really any good wins. Beating Texas A&M, I guess, is on the road. It's solid, but A&M's now a 4-loss team. Taking a look at this, they do have Oregon as the number 1 overall seed. Obviously, if Oregon wins the Big Ten championship, they're going to be the only undefeated team. They will be the number 1 seed. I think if they lose, they're pretty much guaranteed to be the 5 seed. They are the only team right now that has margin for error when it comes to, even if you lose, you're pretty much locked into a really good seed. Oregon is, because if they're the 5 seed, they're going to face a 12, which is probably Arizona State. Although Arizona State has been playing better and they looked really good against Arizona, Oregon is in a very, very, very good spot right now. And I do think they'll beat Penn State. It'll probably be a fun game, but I think they'll beat Penn State. And so they would be locked into the number 1 overall seed. If Georgia wins, they're the 2 seed. If Texas wins, they're the 2 seed. Now, it's a little bit different, depending on who loses, because if Georgia loses, they have 3 losses. So I think they'd be lower than if Texas loses. If Texas loses, they only have 2 losses. I think they're probably going to be a top 6, top 7 seed. You can see Boise State as the 4 seed. The situation with the group of 5 right now, if Boise State wins, I think they're in for sure. If they lose, you could argue UNLV should be in because UNLV would have a win over Boise State on the road. That's how they play their conference championship game. Boise State gets to host it because they have a better record. It's not a neutral site game. But the other thing you have to look at is people still talk about Tulane. I don't think Tulane, even if they beat Army, I think they would take UNLV over Tulane. Tulane's problem is they blew it against Memphis. Even though their analytics are still great, you can't have 3 losses. You cannot have 3 losses in group of 5. If they were 11-2, they beat Army in the conference championship, then yes. Now you could also say, well, what about Army? Army, it's a little bit weird because they have a game against Navy after their conference championship is done. So I don't know how that would work out. But Army, they could potentially finish with 1 loss and beat Tulane, which would be another quality win, and also beat Navy. But I don't think it's weird because they have a game after their conference championship because the Army-Navy rivalry. But I do think it's going to be Boise State. If it's not Boise State, I think they're going to pick UNLV over the American champ just because the American champ, the Mountain West champ. Although I don't know, what is UNLV's resume? What's their good win? I mean, Boise State's resume is basically reliant on the fact that they only lost by 3 to Oregon on the road. And then you have SMU. So if SMU wins, they will be the 3 seed. And that's going to be an amazing matchup for whoever faces them. No disrespect to SMU, but in the second round, that's really same thing with Boise State. I mean, that's why the seed has got to change. I mean, you're giving Boise State and SMU buys. It is what it is. You do have, what is this? Okay, so these are 5v12. They have Miami making it. Wow, Miami making it after basically 0 good wins. I mean, listen, they are 10-2. Miami is 10-2. I don't think Miami's going to make it. They have no good wins. They didn't make their conference championship, and they have bad. Losing to Syracuse is not a good loss. That surprises me that they have Miami in. But Texas as a number 5 seed. Yeah, I mean, Texas in this scenario. So this would be Texas losing, and then I guess, because Texas would have 2 losses. This would really come down to a lot of these teams are very similar. Texas, Ohio State, Penn State, Notre Dame. The difference would be Penn State and Texas make their conference championship game. Notre Dame, do you really want to reward Notre Dame with Arizona State? See, this is the thing this is what I would argue as an independent college football person that's not really, not a fan of any of these universities. I think Ohio State should be facing Arizona State. Ohio State would have a better resume than Notre Dame. People talk about, well, Ohio State lost to Michigan. Yeah, it's a rivalry. Look at the key wins. I mean, this is what you have to start looking at. They have 2 losses. We understand, but you can't be rewarding a team like Notre Dame. And I don't dislike Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame, when you look at it on paper, they had a good schedule set up, but none of the teams ended up being good. You could say, well, they beat Army. I mean, is that your good win, really, beating Army at Yankee Stadium? Ohio State beat Penn State, which right now is a top 5 team. They beat Indiana. And by the way, I'm surprised they have Indiana as the 11 seed. I understand. That's an amazing setup for Penn State. No way would they do that. So this is another thing I want to talk about. They will not do a Penn State versus Indiana game. They're going to have to split that up. That needs to be split up. You can't do in conference, but that is Penn State would have, you're facing Indiana and then potentially SMU. That's not a good draw for Ohio State or Tennessee. They have to face each other, and then Oregon. Yeah. Texas, that's a great draw for Texas. You get Miami and then Boise State. Georgia, that's a pretty good draw for Georgia. You get probably Notre Dame. This would be my prediction. This would be my prediction right now. I don't think Miami makes it. So the thing is, they're saying Miami with 2 losses is better than those SEC teams with 3 losses. What? Because they have less losses? Listen, I'm not even an SEC fan, but let's be honest. You got to look at the schedules. The schedules are, and I understand that like, where is Miami? Miami is, and this is the golden metric, strength of record. Miami's 14th. South Carolina's ahead of them. Alabama's ahead of them. Yeah, I think Ole Miss is done. Ole Miss just doesn't have the overall resume. They don't. Ole Miss is going to be done. I can't see Ole Miss making it. You could say, well, Ole Miss beat South Carolina, but Ole Miss has that bad they've got a few bad losses. They just lost to Florida. It might come down to Alabama against South Carolina. That's what it might come down to. Unless you want to pick, what is Miami's strength of schedule? 55. So let's look at some of these strength of schedules. Oregon does not have a good strength of schedule. It's kind of weird because Oregon, I feel like, should have a better strength of schedule than they do, because they face Boise State non-conference. But their strength of schedule is 60th. Georgia is 3rd overall. Texas is 32. Penn State 36. See, Notre Dame, this is tough, but their strength of record is decent. I mean, if you're Notre Dame, you want to get that 5v12 matchup. Or if you're Notre Dame, you either want to face... I don't know if you want to face Miami. Because the thing is, I would rather face Arizona State or SMU if SMU loses than Miami, even though Miami's bad on defense. But some of these strength of schedules: Tennessee at 28, Ohio State at 26. Ohio State falls to number 7 in terms of strength of record. Indiana's at number 8. I think Indiana's going to be ranked higher than 11, honestly. Now, the argument against Indiana is they've got no good wins, and that's true. I just don't think Miami has any good wins. So Miami's 10-2. They're saying Miami's going to make it over any of the 3-loss SEC teams. They did beat Florida, but it's like they have no wins, man. They really have no wins. and they've lost 2 of their last 3 games. Yeah, I just can't see Miami making it. And the only reason I'm looking at this is because this bracket predicted Miami to make it. Um, but I mean, listen, this is what it comes down to for the ACC. If Clemson wins, they're going to get the auto bid, and then SMU I think will still make it. And you'd be like, well, what's the difference between Miami and SMU? Well, SMU would have made their conference championship game, and do you want to punish them for that? Because technically, they're finishing the regular season with 1 loss. They're 11-1. It's the same thing with Penn State. So they have Penn State ranked 2 spots in front of Ohio State. This is what I think is going to happen with Penn State, and people may or may not agree with it. If Penn State loses a very close game against Oregon, I do think they will rank Penn State above Ohio State because they're not going to punish them for the conference championship loss. But if they lose by 2 touchdowns, I think Ohio State is ranked above Penn State. Technically, if you look at those 2 teams, Penn State would be 11-2, Ohio State would be 10-2. There is the idea that you don't want to penalize Penn State because they made the conference championship, but you do also have to think they both have 2 losses. Penn State would have a much worse loss against Oregon than Ohio State's 1-point loss, and Ohio State beat Penn State on the road, and they've likely, although I don't know if they would have better metrics, that loss really bumped Ohio State down, obviously. Yeah, Penn State right now is 4th in strength of record. Ohio State is 7th. So, I mean, we'll have to see, but I'm guessing Penn State will probably finish above Ohio State unless they lose handedly to Oregon. Like, if Oregon wins 42-24 or something, I could see Penn State moving below. I mean, listen, if you're Ohio State, if you're talking about you would like to face Miami. I don't think it would happen, though, because there's no way Ohio State gets to the 5 seed. It's just not going to happen. The loss to Michigan at home is too crippling to get up to the 5 seed at this point. I mean, the only thing you can think of, well, if Georgia loses to Texas, then Georgia would have 3 losses and they would be placed somewhere into this mosh pit. Where exactly, I don't know. But my prediction was that, okay, so let's say Texas wins. Texas would be the 2 seed. If Georgia has 3 losses, I have no clue where you put Georgia, man. I really don't. Because they're 3 losses, but they made the SEC championship. They almost lost to Georgia Tech. I mean, what are they, at 7 or an 8 seed at that point? 3 losses, would they be below Ohio State, who's got 2 losses? I mean, it's hard, but I think this is what I think. I think they have Miami. Why do they have Miami as the 12? It's just, I guess what you could say is, if it's not Miami, then it would be Alabama. Dude, imagine Texas against Alabama. I guess we'll see what they end up doing. Do they value losses or resume? It just depends. But yeah, you could be looking at Texas versus Miami 5v12. That's if Texas loses. If Texas wins, then I guess Penn State would take the 5. Penn State against Alabama 5v12. 6v11. What would the 6 be? I don't think they would put Georgia as a 6 seed if they lost to Texas. Notre Dame would probably go to a 6 seed. I mean, if you're Notre Dame, you want to face an Arizona State or an Indiana if you're Notre Dame. Even though the Indiana, it's in-state, Notre Dame does have a few decent options here. If you're Notre Dame, you just want to avoid an SEC team. If Arizona State, Indiana, they're not going to. If you're Ohio State, you want to face. You don't really want to face Tennessee. You'd much rather face Indiana or Arizona State, but they're not going to have Ohio State face Indiana. They're not going to have a Big Ten matchup. I think they would switch this to have Penn State take on Arizona State and Notre Dame to take on Indiana. I'm guessing because they're not going to want another. I mean, sometimes you're not going to be able to avoid it. It just depends. But there's a lot to sort out with this. But generally, I don't think Miami's going to make it with 2 losses. With their resume. I mean, they just don't have a good win. And you've got 2 losses, and it'd be one thing if you have 2 losses, one of them being in the ACC championship. Because then you can, that would get penalized less, just like Penn State potentially losing to Oregon. But, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. And, Arizona State, so it's BYU versus Arizona State. I didn't even, did BYU end up winning? Let me look at this really quickly. UNLV Boise State. I think that's probably for the playoff. You might be able to argue Tulane, but I think whoever wins, I don't know, Tulane, but Tulane's going to fall down the rankings. Yeah, I think UNLV Boise State, whoever wins that makes the playoff as the group of 5 auto bid. It is Iowa State, Arizona State. Yeah, I mean, I wonder what the analytics are for this game. Yeah, I mean, Iowa State is the slight favorite. I mean, Iowa State very easily could make the playoff. They're 2.5 point underdogs in that game. What are the analytics for this game? Texas minus 2.5. And then you've got Penn State, Oregon, 3.5 point favorites, Clemson, SMU. All right, so guys, listen, we'll see what ends up happening. There's a lot to discuss. I would say the biggest thing is what happens with the ACC. If they only get one team in, meaning SMU wins, then will that be Miami potentially getting in? Will it be an Alabama? Is Alabama next up, do you think? I mean, it depends with those 3 lost teams, but it might be between Alabama or South Carolina. That might be what you're looking at. Yeah, I don't know where. I'm trying to find the FPI, but either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.